Got some fun news for you, a little announcement here. So we are approaching 50 episodes for the Long Game podcast, which is incredible. So we're going to do a giveaway for you. To celebrate, we're giving away lifetime access to our content strategy frameworks course. It's valued at $997. So this is the most advanced course out there in terms of content strategy. It's filled with screen shares, videos, tutorials, and extra interviews with experts. And we've had dozens and dozens of people go through this, give raving reviews. The course is basically for anybody who's in charge of marketing at a growing company, freelancers who are working on their own blog, anybody who wants to build a smart and cogent content strategy. So you could check the curriculum out. It's on our website at beomniscient.com. This is pretty easy to enter. So to enter, you basically just leave a review for the Long Game podcast, whatever platform you're listening to. I think Apple is probably the most appropriate. Spotify, you can give reviews now, but any others. And we're going to select one winner on February 9th. So once you leave a podcast review, it could be negative, honestly. It could be, please don't leave a negative one, but give us an honest review and tweet at us once you've left that review. It's at beomniscient. That's BEOMNISCIENT to let us know, or you can email us at team@beomniscient.com so we can enter you to win. Ratings and reviews really help us grow, and we'd be can't talk. We would appreciate your help in celebrating 50 great episodes. So if you want a chance to win this content strategy course, just leave us a review. It helps us, and we're going to select one winner. So thank you. Hello. This is Alex Burkett, co-founder of Omniscient Digital, a premium content marketing agency, and you are listening to the Long Game podcast. In this episode, I'm talking to Mischa Vaughn. Mischa is currently the director of content at Webflow. In the past, he has worked on content, editorial, and communications at companies like Carta, Pivotal, Upworthy, Twitter, and TED. In this episode, we talk about the expanding sphere of content, why Webflow is launching a docuseries and streaming platform, the changing landscape of PR, and how the content team is structured at Webflow. Without further ado, here is my conversation with Mischa Vaughn. Interesting. Actually, do you want to start there? Like, what is your umbrella of content, and how do you think that differs from other folks in the space that we may have talked to?
So my approach to content is I'm director of content at Webflow, and now that encompasses our blog, our social media, some video marketing that we're doing. There's a whole batch of video that's done by our wonderful education team, and that's more about instructing of how to use Webflow. We kind of do more of the videos around like why people might use Webflow and customer stories and things like that. And then there's also a design evangelist on my team, and he spins up new channels in addition to a newsletter that we've started. And he also works on websites that we might put together and kind of like whole new programs. His name's Max Lind. He's awesome. And he put together our partner awards, our expert partner awards, which is a combination of, partnerships, business development, and content as well. And then for about a year and a half, PR was on my plate. Thankfully, we've had someone come on board who's leading corporate and customer marketing, and she's taking the PR stuff off my plate, which is great because you can't do everything.
Right. Yeah. It sounds like there's already a lot going on. So does your team sit under, how does the org chart look in terms of this? Like, how does the content team fit? And then do you have multiple disciplines underneath you in terms of your team, or like, how does this all fit in place?
Yeah. So, so there's a marketing team, and then on my peers there's me, director of content, there's director of corporate and customer marketing, there's a director of growth marketing, and there's a director of product marketing, and then we're hiring for a couple other leaders on that team now. But in content there's kind of like the blog is one function, social is one function, video is another function, and then there's copy and design evangelism. It's a pretty flat org. Like there's only one person who reports to me who manages someone else. Eventually, that may need to change as we scale, but for now, it's very flat, and I think it's good. We have a lot of collaboration too that way, which I think is wonderful.
Do you have SEO resources on your team, or do you have SEO? Is that under growth marketing? And do you work with SEO to facilitate some of the blog work?
Yeah, for sure. No, SEO is a heavy part. I mean, I think of there is blog content that we create that is for sure targeted at certain keywords to help sort of funnel the organic growth engine. I think every company needs this. And I've done it in a myriad of ways. At Carta previously, that was like very much just on content, and that was, and we had an SEO agency, and they helped us with research, and we did the execution. Here we've tried a couple different angles, and right now where we're at, it's sort of we kind of collaborate on the research, and there is someone who works in SEO on the growth side. There's an organic growth team, and he'll advise us. And there's actually a webinar we just did with him. His name's Omid Gyam, and we did a whole thing on SEO and Webflow and just SEO in general. So we'll collaborate on a strategy, and then we'll go execute it. We have freelance writers that we work with. We have agencies and stuff, but we kind of also think of SEO really as just another distribution mechanism. So any piece you're writing, whether it's a thought leadership piece, there's probably something that it can be SEO optimized around, or there probably is like something there. And it's not like we finish a piece and we change like 50% of it to fit a keyword. It's more just like, oh, when we're conceiving of a piece, is there a keyword or something that makes sense to go after here? Let's do some research on it. Let's see, are there some things we can do, some ways we can title things to make sure that it will actually rank for something. So SEO for sure impacts, and the blog has incredible domain authority. So it's a good place there. We also, given that Webflow is a website place where you can go and build websites, we also have a method for building landing pages really quickly too.
I like that you didn't fully delineate between thought leadership and SEO, because I think in people's minds that's sometimes completely separate. I wrote a piece a while back that said like every article should be an SEO article or something like that, and basically made the point that even if you don't start the research process by using keywords, like there's almost always a keyword that you can append to it and potentially get more distribution. And then my co-founder Ali has this concept that I love called the SEO sandwich, because like people, I think everybody's got access to the same keywords now, so you get a lot of kind of rehashed, similar looking content. But she's like, all right, take the keyword and then write your own thing, forget about the keyword, and then basically optimize it after the fact for the SEO. You're right. Like what you write in the middle doesn't have to look like all the other stuff on the SERPs. So it sounds like y'all have, maybe a pain point SEO approach where it's like you're talking about customer pain points, you're getting ideas through a different avenue, or how does the ideation process work there?
Well, for our general SEO framework, we have an approach that looks at where we look at okay, what are we just looking at different steps in our customer funnel, and like you said, mapping to customer pain points for sure, and that's something that for even before we really do like what keyword we're going to do, we take a step back and we think, okay, what are the who's the audience for this, and what goals do we have for them, whether that is like a very clear CTA for them afterwards, or there's something for them to read or something for them to watch, an educational thing afterwards. And that's how we kind of like think. And we try to build these very, even around these keywords, we try to build these pillar pages. So we try to have, there's, if we're doing portfolio websites, that there's one page that they're all linking back to, kind of like the hub and spoke approach there. And then we, and sometimes the key thing that we send people to may not even be a blog page. It may be there's a portfolio course actually that our education team created in January of 2021, and that is such a good course, and that's like the clear bottom of the funnel CTA that we need to send people to. So that is a key part of our portfolio pillar. And that helps really just make sure that we're delivering the right thing to customers at the right time. But even before we get started, I make sure that we have a very clear sense of who our audience is for each piece, what our goal is, and then what it needs to succeed, whether that's images or how it needs to be distributed, or other connections or CTAs and things like that.
Cool. An interesting thought I had is with the thought leadership stuff in Webflow, I guess like y'all are in kind of an interesting space because this term no code is relatively new. I don't know, within the last like maybe 4 or 5 years, I feel like I started hearing it, maybe not even that long. Do you consciously think about being the kind of educational forerunner, the thought leader in terms of like telling people what no code is, like leading, I guess, the movement of no code? So I found a lot in B2B, like people with these new industries where you're kind of creating a terminology. You can't just go write like, best CRM or something because everybody knows what a CRM is. But like, is there a challenge of like educating people on what no code and that movement is even about? And do you take that up on the content team?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a challenge that the whole company really faces. And I think you can look at other terms too. I mean, like how many people were using the term fintech like 5 years ago, like probably not as many. And now it's commonplace. And I would say, and it's now almost like transcended into a broader audience. And I think no code will be there in a few years. And then you could argue like it's somewhat there now with like, if you think of no code and low code together. But I think there's like sometimes, for instance, when I was at Carta, we weren't writing a ton around fintech because even though we were a fintech company and even though we served a bunch of fintech companies there, and at Webflow, we definitely are writing about no code. There's like some key pages that we have, some blog pages and some landing pages we have that help explain it. And then, I think there is some general overview stuff, but I think with any company too, there's a question of like, how much do you want to get boxed in by a certain word and stuff? There are some companies in the no code space that are even, trying to triple down on the term, like even more than we are. I think, we're trying to just, at Webflow, we're trying to just get known for, if you want to build really powerful websites, we're the best place to do it. Regardless of if you want to do it with no code or not. It's just we're a place where you can, your designers can do it, your developers will be happier. And that's what we're trying to communicate. And sometimes if you get too overly focused on a term, you can get, it may not be, obviously the search volume isn't there right now. It may be there in the future. But you also need to kind of like hedge your bets a little bit. You need to play a little bit for the future. And you need to do a little bit now. So I think that's what's the fun challenge of creating content is you're not just creating content for right now. You're trying to like anticipate what is your audience going to be thinking about in 6 months, in a year. Because SEO, as we all know, like it takes a few months for your pieces to like even rank sometimes. We have the benefit of a very high domain authority where sometimes it can just take a few weeks, sometimes even a few days. But even then we don't, there are some big ambitious things that we want to tackle. And by and large part, those have pretty much nothing to do with no code.
Yeah, I always use this. I love that you stumbled upon this idea of the long game of content in SEO, because I always use this term like it's a gardening, not hunting, and you've got to play it for the long term. You mentioned that PR was under your domain for a while. Was it different with PR? PR seems like much more of a like right now type of thing versus content, like laying seeds for the future.
I don't know that I completely agree with that. I think if you look at the brands that have really become household names, you look at, say, the Airbnbs of the world, and even, for lack of a better word, the Facebooks, the Ubers, the Twitters of the world, whether they've had intentional PR or not, they've been very much a focus of the press. And so if you don't focus on that and you don't do that early, and I think Airbnb is a company that is an example of a company that has done it really well. And in fact, I think their CEO, Brian Chesky, even said like they overly invest in PR, and it served them really well. And, I have some conflicting feelings about Airbnb given their effect on housing markets in places like Austin, San Francisco, and whatnot, and things. And I think a lot of other people will also feel that way, but they've done such a good job with their PR that they've been able to like mitigate some of that. And also PR does affect your content like really right now too. Like I would say like that's one of the big things that I look for when I hire people is if you can't essentially read the room, then you have bigger problems for creating your content. And by reading the room, I mean, like, do you understand your market? Do you understand all the macro factors that are going in, whether it's economical factors, whether it's culture factors. And with no code, for example, there's, you're democratizing code and stuff. Do you also understand like where the history of visual development, where that comes from? Do you understand how the interplay between designers and developers? And then also, do you understand like, there's always like, also the problem with the term no code is developers think, oh, it means you want to get rid of developers. And that's not at all what it means. In fact, all the no code stuff is built on code. And it's, and that's, I think, where PR work really, or just like having a sense of that mentality is really helpful. And also with content, and a great content operation at a company helps inform the, it's sort of like they call, we call blog content owned content, and then PR is earned content. So the owned and earned they can help inform each other. They can you can write something that's intended for your blog, but before it goes out there, especially if it's a customer story or something, you can pitch that potentially, whether it's a video or a piece, and that's where really tight collaboration is important. And I think we were able to do that at Webflow a couple times. We were able to do that at Carta somewhat, but actually that's a practice that I got into at Pivotal, which is actually my first job into content at a B2B level. And we just had a really good method we'd write something and then we'd work with our PR agency. And part of that too is like, I actually, even though I was running content, I sat in the communications org. So as we wrote some things, we were able to pitch them and kind of get 2-for-1s. We were able to do that at a pretty regular cadence. Granted, this was also like 6-7 years ago. Press is in a very different state now. Press is completely different now after the pandemic, but I think it's an area that most companies tend to underinvest in, and it's hard now too. It is difficult. You don't get to show the ROI quite as cleanly as you do on blog and other things. But I do think it's an important area. At the same time, it needs someone to like really focus on it, and that's why I'm very grateful for my new colleague Lindsay, who joined, who's able to take it on and really push it and give it the attention that it deserves.
What do you mean by how the press has changed from 6-7 years ago, and especially after the pandemic? What have the changes been like?
I mean, just in general in media, you've seen a lot of consolidation. So you tend to have, bigger, you can look at, I think even just TechCrunch since 6-7 years ago, they've probably had 3 or 4 different parent companies like since then. And that doesn't change things on necessarily like a macro level, but you can even look at like what they cover now. Like TechCrunch now, pretty much not exclusively, but I'd say like almost like 50% of what they cover is just funding news. And that's it. And then also like there's the macro environment now, there's so much VC money out there and so many people are raising money that there's just like, that's what you're fighting against. And it used to be, $100 million round was such a big deal. And now it's pretty commonplace with a lot of these high growth companies. So that's what you're fighting up against. And everyone wants to see dollar signs, everything is like, press has skewed so much towards the economic side. And that's, and it's much harder to get product coverage if you're not one of these big companies like a Facebook, Amazon, Google and whatnot. It does happen on occasion with some other public companies and some private companies. You can even look at Notion as a company that's private and has pretty great press coverage. But part of that too is they built up that sort of reputation in the press over the last few years, and they've just been like, it's a matter of hype, and they've just been really good at developing that over the last few years. So I think that's what's different. Like being able to manufacture that hype now is much harder because those levers that you used to have to do it, raising a lot of money, releasing things, those are just like a little bit more commonplace. There's more competition there. So you have to stand out. If you're not about one of these like new trends, like a Web3 or something, it's going to be a little bit harder to just sort of stand out in that PR. If you have unless you have a CEO that's really able to just like, go off the cuff and shoot from the hip. And even then there's like so many CEOs trying to do that right now. So it's like, it's just really tough. And I think, just the pandemic, you can't meet with reporters one-on-one for, just to catch up the way you could. And that goes for whether you're a CEO or whether you're a PR person at a company. There's a lot of PR is just relationship building. And that's just stuff that you can't do via Zoom quite as effectively. And that's a pretty big reason by this just like fundamental nature and shift in PR right now.
Have you seen also this trend, which actually it sounds like almost a merging of content and PR, of like software companies becoming media companies and like going direct when they make these announcements? It seems like that would factor into this changing landscape as well, where it's like if you have a big enough audience, you just put the press release on your blog, basically.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we have our newsletter inspo has over 500,000 people that get it. Like it's a huge emailing list, and it actually helps with us when we talk to potential guest writers and stuff too. It's a huge selling point. And yeah, I think that every company, when you get big enough, does become somewhat of a media company. And you'll even look at, like Netflix even just releasing a publication now to cover their stuff. And they are a media company ostensibly right now. So it's, I think that does definitely play a role in it for two. But I also think that's like, it's a little bit like of a chicken and the egg thing too. Like, yes, that was happening, but also the way coverage was changing and also just like less outlets out there and just less coverage to be had. There may have been some frustration. So it may have like born some of these publications and media approaches like coming together and stuff too, or people feeling like, oh, reporters aren't treating this subject as fairly, which is I think what A16Z's
like Coinbase
feature.
And stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And Coinbase and stuff. Yeah. And so I think it's definitely a little bit of what you said, but it's also a little bit of like it's born out of this problem as well.
Nice. I feel like this is an interesting transition. So there's multiple types of media companies. There's kind of like Netflix style edutainment, entertainment, and then there's journalism. And it sounds like you guys are introducing more of a entertainment category with this Webflow TV and Generation No Code. So
yeah.
Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I would love to. Thanks. So Webflow TV is something we just launched last week. It is a streaming platform that we built in about a month on Webflow. We used like 5 tools and we built it in about a month. It came out of an internal hackathon that a few folks worked on, and then a designer joined. And Webflow, if you're not familiar, it's this way to kind of visually manipulate code. And she was able to put it together and connect things. There was a little bit of custom code that we did to get like when a video finishes, it auto advances to the next thing, kind of that auto advanced feature. And then it's a streaming platform where we're going to have original and curated entertaining content and stories around creativity and entrepreneurship and design as well. And so these are going to really be story based. So you might have someone taking you through how they built their agency or something, or you might have a freelancer talking to them about how they pitch clients or something like that. And Generation No Code is Webflow's first original docuseries. It's going to follow 4 different stories in the about just people in the no code movement and the impact that they're having on their businesses, on their communities, and it's a really fantastic story. We're working with Matthew Encina, who's incredible director and creative designer, who used to be with The Future. He's now independent, and he's just really well known in the design community, really incredible storyteller. And, we produced this, obviously during the pandemic, and flew to different corners of the country here to really capture what this impact is having. And what I'm excited about it is like, it's not a customer story and like you would have just like, oh, here's a normal talking. And like, we really try to treat this as a documentary and as a really like original, series. And just like the production company that we worked with, like they understood Webflow too, like their site was built Webflow. So everyone had this like understanding of and appreciation of the movement and of the and of what it's been enabled. So I think that really just helps add a richness to it. It's going to be a really it's going to start. We just released the trailer for it. The first episodes will drop in early 2022. And we're just so excited about it. And we're excited to produce more stuff like that, because I think that's how you really stand out now. And also just like Webflow in general, our product or the results of our product are just so visual. And it's just like, it makes sense to just like invest more into video than any other format right now.
Is the goal of this, it sounds like it's product tangential, but not completely circulating your product. It sounds like maybe, it's around the same space, but like, is this something that you hope current customers and people in your atmosphere already they watch, or is this something that you're hoping to bring in a whole new audience that may be interested in a no code platform, but they may just be interested in the quality of the show itself.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we're thinking there's a very broad play in it for sure. We're thinking that it ties into some stuff we're doing for sure, but we're not thinking of it as like, oh, this is, going to, directly result in people using Webflow in this specific way. We hope it just inspires people in general around the movement for sure. Obviously, like the way we host it on Webflow TV, we can control the CTAs and stuff around it, so we can push people to either like the right education course or the right something that hopefully helps give them that extra bump. But yeah, we're hoping that just people find it entertaining and interesting, and I think that's a key thing too. The world of design is very big, and also with Webflow itself, we have the ability to make our work just a lot more broadly accessible in general. And I think even we do it, the education team does it through their work. We can do it through our work. And I think it can have this like really wonderful cascading effect on just no code in general.
How do you build distribution, and how do you get eyes on Webflow TV and Generation No Code? I'm sure you're using your own blog, your newsletter, but what's the plan here?
Yeah, I mean, it's a work in progress because we obviously just launched, but it'll be a combination of organic and paid efforts too. Like that's another thing too that's really nice about this is we can because we're bringing together all these different design things that, yes, they exist on YouTube and other things, but they're not in one place and they're not necessarily easy to find. There isn't that curation element of like, oh, what are really like the best, some of the best stories out there. And so by bringing them together, like we're hoping that we can create this like destination for if you're interested in design, entrepreneurship, and just entrepreneurship on the web in general, that you'll see Webflow TV as a good resource to go to. And we hope to point people to it, through our organic channels just regularly, and then also through some paid work as well. And then also just like, when every time a new series drops or we add something to it, that's an opportunity to promote it as well. So we can create kind of this like Netflix style promotional stuff around these new series when they drop.
I'm imagining like a masterclass or like a creative live for design and no code entrepreneurship. So it's like you also get these potentially big names who, each of them has an audience too, and each of them is going to bring in a certain percentage of people.
Yeah. I mean, and that's honestly the beauty of the platform, like Webflow too. Now, I don't want to sound like too much of a salesman here, but you really, as we're adding these features to like memberships and stuff, you can really potentially build your own masterclass and stuff like that. So it's not just us who can do it; it's really like anybody if they just have the willingness and time to invest there.
That's awesome. You mentioned that video. I can't remember the specific phrase you said, but video is like the most important place to invest, or like the most impactful right now. Why do you think that?
I mean, I think video is the most impactful place for almost any brand, I'll say. Granted, text is really, it obviously results in better search and stuff and you get probably better bang for your buck with search. But I think the reason why I say video is the most impactful is that I just think video is the most impactful medium regardless. Like you get visuals and you get sound. So you're affecting two senses in the human body, and it's just like you can really affect people. And if you just think of like the media that actually like creates an emotional response in people, like what are they? Like, yes, a photo can do it, and yes, like great writing can do it, but like a great movie, a great even a great commercial, like that'll make me cry, like if it's done well, if it hits the points. And just like the power that video has over other mediums is immense. And also, as most social media platforms are trending more towards being more video centric now. Like I would say Instagram is a video platform now. Like I wouldn't even call it a photo platform anymore, especially with stories, especially with Reels, TikTok, obviously, and then even LinkedIn is they're all so video centric now, and videos are given a premium in their algorithm. A lot of people will remember like to joke about the Facebook pivot to video and stuff, but Facebook aside and all that stuff aside, video just is at the forefront now. There are, everyone has a video camera in their pocket now, and so it's so much easier to share than ever before. And that's kind of what you're competing against now. That's what just everyone is sharing. They're not just sharing text anymore; they're sharing videos, I would say. And I think that's just where we're headed. It's not going to slow down like anymore. It's just going to get more and more video centric. It's just going to be easier to share.
Yeah, I actually agree with that. I think podcast too is an interesting medium, especially you mentioned the trust and kind of like different emotional resonance. And it's like if you listen to the same voice in your ear over and over the course of multiple weeks, that just has such a bigger impact. Like you start to get to feel like you know the person, as opposed to it happens on text a little bit. If you're really good. I was wondering on a personal note, and I hate to say this as a content agency founder. Have you noticed your content consumption habits change? I don't know if you used to read a lot of blog posts, if you still do.
Yeah.
Personally, I feel like I don't read as many.
I probably don't read as many. I mean, I still read a lot of articles, I would say. I've made a conscious decision. So I definitely watch more YouTube stuff. And I will say, like, I loved like TikTok during the pandemic, but I had to take TikTok off my phone. I was just like, it would become a time sink and stuff.
It was just like an addiction kind of thing.
Yeah. And exactly. And it really felt like an addiction. I was like, I need to take this off my phone. I spend too much time on my phone anyway. So that definitely was a noticeable pattern. But I do watch, there's a few things I watch on YouTube that I'm like, oh, these are shows or people that I do like turn to. And I know when their new stuff comes out. So I definitely have noticed that. And I think it's funny, like as a millennial, like saying this, I'm sure like there's people in Gen Z like, yeah, they go to YouTube first and foremost. Like they're more interested in YouTube than they are in TV. I think obviously there's a lot of TV and stuff I watch, but and yeah, I just read probably most of what I come across on the internet is like from Twitter. Like I have,
Same, yeah.
So that's still, I think, my window into a lot of things. And I think Twitter, even though if it's not the biggest social media, rather it definitely influences a lot of them. I would say like a lot of things will like, you'll see like tweets being linked to on Reddit and on other places. It's just, and so like, even if you're not starting there, a lot of things like do come back. Like I think, even in my time, like when I worked at Twitter, I remember when we launched the kind of, they called it like Twitter One or whatever. And it sort of like was the beginning of the skeleton of what you see in Twitter today. The most impactful thing and the thing that I was most excited about was Twitter tweets being able to be embedded. And even just that, like having that everywhere, it's like you can really, really encounter it. But other than that, I try to read books more frequently. It's tough because I really love fiction. And then I for nonfiction books, it's like so many of them have what I call just like the Malcolm Gladwell effect, where it's like there's too many words in there and they don't need to be that long, and they could be they could be 3 chapters and you would get just as much out of them. And I think that's not, and it's particular with like modern nonfiction where that's a problem. And there's some people who are doing interesting explorations of like what comes after the book in a nonfiction capacity. But I think pretty much for the most part it's definitely articles that I read, but I have noticed an uptick in video and stuff. And sometimes it's nice, to get that. I do listen to a lot more podcasts than I have before. They're mostly basketball podcasts just because I enjoy the chatter around it. But I do listen to a lot of other things. It's nice when you're walking the dog to be able to have that sort of like passive noise.
Yeah. You hit on a couple interesting points. The one being the long books. And I think I don't want to say who it was because I'm going to mess it up, but it might have been Paul Graham say that many books should be blog posts and many blog posts should be tweets. And that's where I think Twitter's been interesting is I feel like I almost read it like I used to read blogs. I use it to discover new things, filter in and out. And like I spend a lot of time getting insights there from threads. And similarly, I guess like I watch a lot more YouTube too. And in fact, there's some business content that I watch there. I talk about this sometimes and I feel like it's still kind of obscure. So this channel, the Punk Rock MBA, he talks, I'm super into like old school punk rock and pop punk. And he goes through like these, histories of different bands and trends and stuff like that, and ties it into like business and marketing lessons. And that's probably what I would have read on a blog post maybe 10 years ago or 5 years ago. So it's been fascinating. I don't know if you've got business content that you listen to or watch on YouTube as well, or it's more just, basketball and more like recreational stuff, but it's been fascinating to see that shift.
Yeah, it has been fascinating. I think with threads and with stories on Instagram too, you just have people have these like storytelling mechanisms, and there's a lot. It's easier to set up an account on those channels, and the audience is already built in and stuff, versus setting up a blog and watching. You have to direct people to it takes a lot of work and a lot of investment. But you can start. You'll see a lot of people start as an Instagram page or it used to be a Twitter, I guess like 5 years ago, but they'll start as Instagram and then they'll eventually like create their own channel. And there's obviously like newsletters too. There's a lot, newsletters have been having their moment for sure, thanks to Substack and other channels like that. So I think, you'll get also just like a lot more of the interesting writing there. And it kind of like brings me back to like something that I remember thinking this like 5 years ago, and I should have put it out there in a tweet just to have like to refer to. It's like, I basically think like the future of media, you're going to have like a lot of companies that are basically under 10 people or over 1,000 and basically like nothing in between. Because that's just media now and the way it's working. Like you're only going to work as either like a big conglomerate or a tiny team that just is like able to, move really fast and doesn't have a lot of overhead. And I think that's kind of the future that we're seeing born out right now. And it might be even smaller, it might be under 5 too, with this like newsletter stuff and the way we have a lot of solo people. But I think it's still early there too. I think there's a question of like how fruitful will it be for people? Will people get like frustrated with paying Substack once they get really, really big and stuff, and even things like Patreon and stuff too. I think there's a question of like how do they have churn at the top once their people get really big? And I think that's still an open question.
Well, there's also the strange phenomenon, which is also apparent in like streaming services, where once you start stacking on multiple Substacks and you're paying for 20 of them, you start to question like, should I just get a subscription to The Atlantic? Like, I feel like this was consolidated for me before, and it was really nice.
Yeah, I actually just subscribed to The New Yorker because they had this Black Friday deal, and I was like, okay, for like 60 minutes, I'll try it, and it'd be nice to have like a magazine and go through it. So yeah, I actually just sort of encountered that too. I was like, I read The New Yorker a lot. I find myself drawn to their articles a lot. Like maybe it might only be like 1 or 2 a week, but it's enough where I'm just like, okay, like maybe I'll give it a shot. And at the same time too, like subscribing to The New Yorker was such a headache. Like it was like it compared to like subscribing to like a Substack. So it was interesting to do that. So like I don't know that I'll maintain it, but it was interesting just to like go through that process again of subscribing to a new thing. I definitely probably pay for more things, and like my media budget has definitely skyrocketed, I think, since the pandemic, especially. But it's also you want to support either the creators that you think are doing great work or you feel are really entertaining and stuff. And I think it's I think that's gonna not go away. I think that sort of that culture comes in a way from YouTube with the, hey, please like and subscribe or check out my Patreon, like that. It sort of was born out of there. And I think people just expect it now too. Like, and also people want to do it. People understand, hey, like $5, it's a cup of coffee. And like, I'd rather support this journalism. And Substack does have some people doing really incredible journalism in a couple fronts. And it's just like, and by them being independent, they're maybe able to do it at a level that they wouldn't be able to at a paper, because at a paper they're going to have editors, and the paper has interests. They have even whether they have advertisers or have other folks that they have to answer to and stuff. So they're able to do stuff around it. I find it really funny. There's like a tech podcast I listen to, and every other week there's an ad from Facebook on it or from Amazon about like all the great work they're doing. I'm like, really? Like, come on, people. Like these are companies that we're supposed to be looking at under a critical lens, and you're taking their money. But at the same time, hey, I get it. They need to, these places need to take money from. Do I wish I didn't have to listen to these ads? Like, sure, but I do. And, there's a future coming, and I think we're, maybe a quarter of the way there, where the people are just more attuned to their attention and what gets their money from a media perspective.
I do love that direct support model. Are you familiar with Sam Harris?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. So like, I don't know how long he's been doing this, but many years ago, he opened up that, direct donation support model for the podcast. And I know he's got like a freemium version, so to speak, where it's like kind of 3/4 or half of the podcast. And then you pay, I think it's whatever you want. I think I pay like $5 a month or something like that. But then I get the full access to the podcast. And then I also get his app and all that stuff. On a side tangent, that model is why I partially understand NFTs and Web3. I've been doing all the reading, and I keep going back. I'm like, oh yeah, I kind of get it because of the Sam Harris thing. But he mentioned the specific thing that you mentioned, which is he didn't want to take ad money. He didn't want it to be a consideration around what he talked about, because he wanted to keep that open forum for like, whatever controversial, contrarian discussions he wanted to have. So I think in particular examples like that, it makes a ton of sense to go direct. And I could see that being much more popular in the future.
Mm-hmm.
I want to just roll back, and I didn't ask how you came to be director of content at Webflow. Like, what's your background? You mentioned a couple different companies, Twitter, Carta. Where'd you come from?
Sure. Yeah. So I can give the background. I've been working in tech, media, and marketing for 12 years now. And started, I went to college. I studied writing and literature, graduated like right as the Great Recession was like kicking off and stuff, but it wasn't like fully there yet. So 2008 or so, worked on some films, and then got an internship with the TED conferences. It turned into a consulting role, and that was mostly just because I knew how to use Google Docs, and they were like, "Oh, you know how to use Google Docs? Great!" And I so that started, and that was kind of like my window into tech and stuff. And I had obviously been familiar with TED from right before that, and then you know, moved out to San Francisco, got a job with Twitter, started in support there. Twitter was about 100 people when I joined, so it was a very wild time to join that particular company. By the time I left, I think it was 2,500, and that was just like 2.5 years later. And so I ended up at Twitter working on did some work on monetization, some product work, and then eventually ended up on the media and content team. So that was everything from partnerships to I would say partnerships and content development, working with folks like the NBA. We did a Q&A with the White House, with President Obama. And that was all like, designing like the editorial flow for the questions that we would ask them, and picking the moderators and things like that, and how we would promote it, and also the user experience of the site that you would do that. So that kind of approach happened there. We'd work with other TV networks too, some stuff around reality TV stuff and things there. And then after Twitter, worked for a media company called Upworthy, that you may or may not remember. They ruined Facebook for a few years. And so work there was like pretty early on. It was employee number like 12 or something there, and worked on both product and editorial there. So I was helping build the CMS and then using the CMS as well. And then after that, kind of got a little burnt out on media just in general. I ended up consulting for about like 2 years or so, working with a couple startups and VC firms. And then I got my job at Pivotal, and that was where it was content and social and some video stuff, and that was sitting in communications, so also working, collaborating with folks on the PR side pretty closely. And then after that, head of editorial at Carta. So I was at Pivotal for almost 4 years, through the IPO. Pivotal's now been bought by VMware and spun out or something. But after Pivotal was Carta, where it was head of editorial, which was pretty much blog and social, and then really worked on some like data journalism stuff, which Carta does now still and does a great job with. And then after Carta, Webflow had been on my radar for a bit because I'd been following Vlad, the CEO, and then and his tweets were really great. He doesn't tweet as much anymore. But when he does, they're good. So I'd been interested in Webflow, thought of building my own site in Webflow, but clearly was like, okay, I need to sit and really like learn this for a minute. And then as I just like found out more about the company and the community, it really just felt like something really special. And I've been building websites since I was 10, 11 years old and stuff. And I can remember like those first early explorations, and just like Webflow felt like a very natural evolution of that. And just like it felt like there were really like interesting and creative stories to tell just about craft and stuff. And something that's drawn me to Webflow is just like no one really talks about websites the way they talk about films or TV shows and stuff. And when you think of it just like as a medium, like websites are a medium that we probably use more or see more on a day-to-day basis. And when we talk about websites or web experiences, we talk about it more from a economic perspective, or here's what it can do for us, or it's maybe more practical. We don't talk about like when you evaluate a website, you have to look at like the form and the function, and also just like there is art and there is craft in a website, and I think that is really interesting. And there's a lot of value they can deliver, but there's also a lot of there's a lot that they have to just like say about the moment, in the same way that like if you looked at paintings in the 16th or 17th century, like those say a lot about the culture now. I think websites can actually say a lot about now, and I think that's like an underexplored area in general of just like cultural criticism.
That is a fascinating viewpoint, and I've never heard websites described like that. Was that something that was that an ethos at Webflow when you came in, or is this something that you've a lens by which you've come to view websites, or how did you develop this framework for viewing them almost under an artistic lens?
I mean, I think there was part of it there. Like, I don't think I brought this, like, and I don't think I'm the only one who has that viewpoint at Webflow at all. And I don't think I'm the only one I don't think Webflow is the only company that has that viewpoint. So I think it's, I think there's a lot of people, and there's a lot of Substacks out there that are doing this kind of stuff right now. I think it's really fascinating. I think it's, you can approach it from so many directions too. Like you can even, you can compare us to almost like a lot of other no-code companies, and we're all creating content in like different ways. And that's a great thing too, is like there isn't like a right way to do it necessarily. Yeah, there's ways that can contribute more to traffic and for sure, but there's a lot of room in this space for many players to cover it in different ways. And I think, we want Webflow to be known, or from a content perspective, I want Webflow to be known as like one of the more thoughtful places to go to read about, the web, to read about, and, whether it's like why people make things for it, or and how they do it, or the types of things that it can inspire.
Yeah, it's so much more of an inspirational view of what websites can be. Because I feel like I've spent too much time in the conversion rate optimization and experimentation world, where you look at it as purely function, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
I want to talk about Upworthy. Did y'all actually write, I think it was 20 headlines per piece, and pick like the best one, or how did that process work?
It was 25 that we'd have to write, actually. It was so annoying. So yeah, that process, there's a couple of decks floating around that you might see where they actually detail some of the product. And there were, once you got into it, it was onerous in the beginning, but once you got into it, there were tricks you could do. You could be like, okay, let's write 5 with a number, and let's write 5, write 5 to your grandmother, and write 5 with the word ninja in it, or just something ridiculous. And you could do it. And eventually, I think the editorial like director at the time, she was like, eventually you figure out like what your number is. Like I tended to, like, some people were like, oh, okay, I can get it around like 8 or so. And usually for me, I was more of like a, 10 to 15 kind of person. Usually that's when I kind of started to hit my flow. And then what we would do from that is we'd pick either, 4 headlines, or we'd pick one headline that was really good, and we'd test 4 different images, and we test them to figure out like, oh, what's the most clickable really there, and then also like what results in the most shares as well. So it was like you're trying to balance like things that get shares and things like that. So that kind of like hyper optimization is what it was both good in a lot of ways for Upworthy, but it also definitely like resulted in a lot of particular styles of headlines being written, which it was definitely infamous for. And then so there was like some pulling back that had to happen. It probably happened like a little bit too late, but now I think if you look at like Upworthy headlines, it was also like a very much a function of social at the time, where like everything was given the same physical real estate on the screen. Like even like you think of like your Facebook feed back in, I guess it was 2012, every link you shared had the same size image and had the same size like text that went with it. So you could, and so we were writing very deliberately. We were saying, you're not writing for the people who are sharing it, you're writing for the people they're sharing it to, because sharing there was very much tied to identity. It still is tied to identity, but also just people don't share original stuff on Facebook quite as much as they do now. In fact, it's been in decline for several years, if you can read in the Facebook leaks and stuff that just came out. But so yeah, sharing was very tied to identity. So we would produce things that were, very tied to a more liberally skewed identity. Like, and it would be like, we'd use the word I in the headline and things like that. Things that you just like don't normally do. And that's because we knew people were sharing these sort of as a, oh, this is something that I'm putting out there because I'm tying it more to my identity. Sort of like the way people say like retweets don't mean endorsements. We were like, oh yeah, people don't really, that was like kind of around the same time. We were like, oh, sort of things you do share, there is like an implied, like I'm attaching this to my personal brand in some ways. And so we understood that, and I think we understood that better than any other company at the time. And now a lot of people understood that, but also like the mechanics of the web have changed. Facebook has changed stuff. They've changed also obviously like how much distribution these pages get. So it's just like you couldn't recreate that now.
Yeah, I remember, I don't know if this was related to Upworthy, but it's been so long since I've read these books, but there was one called Contagious, I think, Jonah Berger, who wrote about like what gets shared and like how that reflects on like your personal identity and like what kind of like persona you want to portray to the world. And I think that factored so much into like how those headlines worked. So I think he said like sad headlines or depressing ones don't work as well, and inspirational ones work really well. Or, I don't remember the specific results, but that's such a fascinating tie into like how you want to be perceived, the character you want to play.
Yeah, inspirational things work well, and sadly, anger-inducing ones work really
anger
well,
for sure,
which actually explains a lot if you think of just like the rise of like extremism, like all over the world and stuff, and you think of like how some of these like publications have risen and stuff, and it's kind of like sad and stuff, and I don't know 100, and it's just you see some tactics and stuff that are out there and you're just like, oh yeah, those like are kind of similar and stuff. So it's like, I do think like platforms, especially Facebook, Twitter, YouTube stuff, they bear some responsibility for like, making sure that sorry about that. There's a grocery delivery. There's I think platforms bear some responsibility for making sure that these messages like don't get spread, because honestly like we spread, like we grew way too fast for Facebook, and even to the point that it made Facebook uncomfortable, and I think they took some corrective action, not necessarily against Upworthy, but it was against like a lot of things like that. Like it's really clearly like that we affected their strategy.
In the back to the headline writing, what did you learn about writing headlines? Like, eventually were you able to basically look at a headline and say like, that's a good one? Like, did you sharpen your own kind of like editorial judgment on headline writing?
Yeah. I mean, I think in general, and it's not just about headlines, but really like you can write the most incredible blog post out there, most incredible article out there. And if you just like don't focus on distribution, like it's not going to get read. So like, it's more so just like, not just about the headline, but about distribution overall. The headline's a key portal for that and window for that. It definitely helped sharpen my headline ability. And I don't write 25 anymore, but I will write, like, if I don't have a good one, I will in a Google comment or something or whatever in the doc, we'll write like 4 or 5 other ones. And like, just kind of, it just helps like, see things out and be like, oh, okay, does this pattern work better here? And I'm not thinking necessarily about sharing. It's just more about like, oh, does this help explain things better, really?
Yeah, it's cool because it's almost like I'm kind of relating this to Twitter. I've been trying to tweet a lot more, and it's like you get this fast feedback loop on Twitter, and it's very bite-sized stuff as well. I couldn't do it for a while because I started looking at it as copywriting. Like I was training myself to become a better copywriter. And with writing that many headlines, and especially the testing mechanisms that you were able to do, it's like you could shorten the time that it took to become a pretty good copywriter, it seems like.
Yeah, I think for a particular style of copy, yes. At the same time too, like copy has many different forms. There's
I guess that's not gonna work on like an enterprise B2B website. Like, you'll never believe what happened next.
Yeah. At the same time too, like I think a lot of copy, having some personality in your copy is important, but it's like balancing like that versus also you want to be very clear what people need to do or the value of a page or something like that, so they don't have to do too much legwork in their head, too much thinking in their heads over just like what this page means.
Do you keep a writing habit outside of your professional work at Webflow? Like, do you have a personal blog, a journal? Like, what do you do kind of outside of Webflow for writing?
I've been really bad about that for the last few years, and I need to. I've journaled here and there, but I need to. I'm working on it. It's just kind of it's hard when you spend like all day on a screen to be like, oh yeah, I want to spend like more time on a screen. So it's something I'm working on. I also don't like, I think the writing that I would do would be very different than the work that I would do, the writing I would do for work and stuff. So balancing that, I'm also balancing some just some carpal tunnel issues too. So it's like makes typing a little bit harder for like extended periods of time. But that's what happens after 12 years in the industry.
Yeah. How so would it be different? Would it just be like would it be completely like you'd write fiction, or
It'd probably be like fiction, essays, short stories, that kind of thing. Yeah, I'm not really interested in writing about. I mean, like I'm interested in writing about this stuff from a professional standpoint, but I'm not for my own personal writing. I don't think it's just like I don't want to do it. Like, could I like even just like talking about this kind of stuff? Like, I love doing it. Don't get me wrong, but I don't want to do it all the time. And that's also the reason why I stopped basically like freelancing. Was just like I don't love to sell myself. I don't love talking about like this stuff. I just like I'd rather talk about more interesting things than work.
Yeah, no, I'm on the same page. I listened to an interview you did with Jimmy Daly on the Superpath podcast, and you had one semi-contrarian opinion around the word content and how you don't like that word. I think that's interesting, but I actually want to ask you a broader question around those contrarian beliefs, which is, is there anything that you believe about content that few others would agree with you on? You know, the classic Peter Thiel question.
Few others would believe it you on. I mean, I think, let's see. I don't know about like few others. I do. I guess, well,
or maybe many would disagree with you on.
Oh, I don't think, well, okay. Yeah, I don't think it's about volume, which a lot of people do think it's about volume. And it's like this kind of like the Ira Glass quote or something of like, you do have to write more to like get to figure out what like quality is like, but I don't think it's like pure quality, like either. Like, you know, there's a lot of like, especially people coming from journalism into company produced media, they'll sometimes be like quality snobs. And like, there are sometimes people who are like, no, it's all volume, all growth. And like, the truth is just like, you need both. Like, and it's not, I think that's just like contrarian, but like, it really is just like, you need both. Like, you can't, I'm not an extremist really. Like I try to have like, I try to like have opinions, but have them weakly held and stuff. So like I can, you know, if there's a good data point or something, or there's a good, because things change, especially with these platforms and stuff too. So you have to be ready for that. And then I think it's just like with the term content, like it's just, to me, it's just like, it doesn't like describe what content is. Like content is like, especially now, like if your content is like just a blog, like you're like completely behind the times, but your content is not just like it's not just a blog. It's like, it's social. It's like, it's the message that you you know, it's tied into brand stuff. It can be video and stuff too. Like it really can be more encompassing, and we don't just have a great word for that. That's why too, I think sometimes you'll see like, there's a lot of companies too where you'll see it's like brand, content, and social, or brand, comms, and social will be grouped together, and content maybe like super growth focused. Like you'll see different companies do different things, and it's all interesting. And I think that's just because people realize like, oh, it plays into your company in a different way. Obviously, if you're self-serve, it's one way, and if you're enterprise, it's another way. At Webflow, we have a little bit of both, so it's like it's a little different here. And I just think like it doesn't encompass like the strategy, even just the word like content. You think of like, oh, content, like it's just like it's like, it's not, it's such a blah word for something that involves like strategy and persona based work, and it's like, it just doesn't, I don't know, I feel like it doesn't do a good descriptive job, but it's the best one that we have.
It is interesting. It's almost like too broad and not broad enough. It's because people use content to describe like in-product content as well. A content strategist could be somebody who plans blog posts, or it could be somebody who plans micro copy and like, yeah, exactly, like a designer would. Yeah. I don't know. I think I'm always a fan of specificity in language. Like I've always had that problem with the word growth as well, which I think started to be specific, but then just kind of got like diluted over time as more and more people took it to mean performance marketer, or some people call it, they'll say growth for like a sales team or something like that. And then it finally just kind of meant nothing. Right. And we keep using the word, but it's like, what the hell is a growth marketer? You know?
Yeah. I mean, it happens with all language. Like AI now, it just means like, you say your company has AI, it just might mean you have an algorithm that does something. And
it's like an if this, then that rule.
It's just like, that's not AI. Like people are like, hey, let's slow it down here. But it's off the rails here. Like we can't put it back in the box, you know, it's sort of done.
Yeah, for sure. Before we finish up, you want to do a couple rapid fire-ish non-content related stuff?
Sure. Let's do it.
Cool. Who do you admire professionally and why?
Who do I admire professionally and why? I really do admire Vlad, CEO of Webflow, a lot. I think he does a great job of standing up for his values and building the company on the terms and the way that he wants to be built.
Cool. If you could create your own category in Jeopardy, what would it be? And would you get every question right?
Let's see. The category that I would create would probably be probably something around Succession TV characters, and I think I would get like 90% of it right.
I keep hearing about Succession. I've not watched it. You would recommend?
Fantastic. It's fantastic. Yeah, you got to watch it. It's a show about comms too. It's basically about comms, and it's really fantastic, and it's probably the best writing on TV right now.
Sick. I'll definitely put that on my list after I get through Narcos. I'm late on that one. Which talent would you most like to have?
I'd probably pick like speaking another language of some type. Yeah.
Do you have a particular language that you gravitate towards?
Let's see. I speak Spanish. I speak French. I speak English. I would probably pick something like either something like German or potentially even like Mandarin or something.
Yeah. I do Spanish as well, not French, but I started learning German because I wanted it to be remarkably different sounding than Spanish, and it is a difficult one. Yeah. It's a very difficult language.
Yeah.
Fun though. Do you consider yourself more scientific or artistic?
Artistic.
What do you consider the most overrated virtue?
The most overrated virtue. I think it's funny. Like, I think it's overrated in some ways. Like, I think, especially when it comes to content, I would say, I think organization is a little bit like overrated. Like, a lot of people, especially I'm thinking of this now because we're going through like planning stuff. Like, people think planning like, oh, let's show your plans for the year. It's like, I'm not going to plan a whole content calendar for a year. Like, no one should do that. And it's just like, it's not sustainable. And no one, and pretty much every content director, I think every single actually content leader that I've talked to, like, plans for maybe a quarter, maybe two, and it's at a very high level. So I think when it comes to that, I think also creativity, like there's a natural messiness that you kind of need to be able to like have to get to the end original output.
Yeah, I totally agree. Have you heard of like Rome Research and Zettelkasten and all of these frameworks for like building a second brain?
Yeah, I have. I'm very interested in it. I may like sign up for it at some point, but I'm also like, I'm someone who's like addicted to like trying new organizational frameworks, and I actually like working with like a coach there in some point too. So like, depending on how my stuff now works out, I may do it or not. But it is interesting to me. But I also like know it's like, oh, is this just like the new shiny thing? That's what I'm kind of battling is I can see it being important, especially if you're like an academic or a writer full time who's genuinely just like immersed in the world of ideas. But part of me thinks like people just, it's almost like a productive form of procrastination sometimes, where it's like, how much time did you spend pulling everything over from Notion or Evernote to Notion and then Notion to Rome and like reorganizing it all? And like, could you maybe have just written the article and just not done all of the planning around that? Yeah, there is such a thing as over research for sure too when it comes to writing as well. But I think organization is like, it's very important. Don't get me wrong, and there's a lot, especially with like I hate having like a project that has like multiple documents or getting like drafts that are in different. Like I hate that. Just keep it all in one document. But I do think from a like planning perspective and researching perspective, it's like there's a natural messiness that comes with content.
For sure. What's a career choice that you had considered but didn't pursue?
Being a book editor and agent. I really love to read, and I really love editing. As much as I love writing, I actually like editing more. And I enjoy it a lot, and I do think I'm pretty good at it. And I I actually interned for a literary agent at some point, and I thought, oh, it'd be great. I'll be reading all day, but I was reading manuscripts that weren't great. So I was like, I don't want to do this.
Interesting. What blogs, podcasts, influencers, content are you kind of following right now?
Let's see. It's a It's a bunch. Webflow's actually director or head of product design, David Hong, has a great Substack that I will read called Proof of Concept. It's about design and also just entrepreneurship, investing stuff. It's interesting. I will follow. Let's see. Podcasts. I mean, from a kind of perspective, there's I forget the names of them. There's one that I just got tuned into that's like growth focused. That was like that I listen to on occasion. That's good. From a just overall tech perspective, I listen to the Equity podcast by TechCrunch with Natasha Mascarenas and Alex, and then another influencer. I don't know. I follow like so many people on Twitter. It's just like that's like where I get all my stuff from.
For sure. Same here. Easy finale. Where can people find you online?
Yes. So you can find me on Twitter. I'm just at Mischa, Mischa. And my website is mishavn.com. Spoiler alert, it's built in Webflow. And yeah.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for doing this. This is super fun.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Alex. Thanks for having me.